Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to join our live online event today. My name is Tom Slee and I lead the Flexible Workspace Consulting team here at Colliers. And I'm delighted to be hosting today's event, which coincides with the launch of our 2020 EMEA Flex report. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned whole industries on their head, caused record levels of uncertainty and accelerated change at unimaginable pace. The workplace has changed for millions of people and forced all occupiers to reevaluate their approach to real estate. The flexible office sector has experienced a slowdown this year, but is there an opportunity for the sector to thrive as occupiers look for more creative workplace solutions? Over the past 10 years, the sector has grown at breakneck speed across the region and has been underpinned by demand from occupiers who are seeking more agility in lease terms, a simplified delivery model, increased speed to market, reduced capex, and access to better amenities and facilities. The pandemic has undoubtedly had an impact, with take-up significantly down so far in 2020. And some operators are hoping to renegotiate lease terms and even close sites. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some encouraging signs across the market, with many operators reporting impressive revenue collection, increased demand both in quantum and size, and even expansion. The sector is fragmented, and there are thousands of operators across the region. The choice on offer is diverse, and later we will hear from our EMEA Head of Research, Damien Harrington, who will provide a detailed overview of the sector over the last 18 months. We will then hear from 4 industry leaders about how the pandemic has impacted their business and how they've had to adapt to continue to support corporate occupiers. I'd like to welcome our panel and thank them for joining us today. We have Ronan Journo, Senior VP of Enterprise at WeWork. Ronan has incredible experience in corporate real estate, having led the real estate team at Cisco for 2 decades. We have James Lowry, MD of Story. James is part of the founding team at Story, which is the British Land's own flexible workspace product, and it now accounts for almost 10% of their office portfolio. We have Lindsay O'Keefe, COO of Ariga, who are one of the largest privately owned operators in the UK, with a network of 18 sites. And we have Daph Cern, Head of Workplace and Real Estate at ServiceNow, who are a $90 billion technology company and employ over 5,000 people. Our panel will be discussing 3 main topics. Firstly, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities the pandemic has caused? Secondly, are they seeing any creative and innovative workplace solutions emerge? And finally, what are the differences in delivery models of flex space? And is this important to occupiers? We'd also like to encourage questions from the audience. This is not just me asking questions, but we hope we're going to get a lot from the audience. So please don't be shy, post in the Q&A and we will answer as many as we can. So without further delay, I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Damien Harrington, who will run us through the key findings from our new report.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. So hopefully we can get the slides up. There we go. Okay, so just a quick bit of structure. So I'm really just going to try and look at flex in the context of what's happening overall, touch on a few macro trends that are going to be driving this sector, what's happening with office markets per se, and then drilling down into what's happening in the flexible workspace market based on the survey that we've done across 42 markets for the last 18 months. So macro trends. Now I think this is quite interesting. It shows foreign direct investment into Europe over the last 17, 18 years. So if you look at the right-hand side here, we've got 2020, and obviously we're showing a bit of a decline relative to every other year for which FDI has been recorded. So it gives an indication of how much uncertainty has been brought about by COVID, by the pandemic, and it's forcing a lot of change. I think what's also interesting is that in 2018 and 2019, flexible workspace operators were largely responsible for a big move in FDI into Europe. So things are changing and it's getting interesting. Next slide. Okay, lost the animation on this one, but take you a little bit of time to absorb it. I think what's interesting here is, we talk about different recovery shapes. I think the K-shape is the new sort of buzzword, or one of them. And if you look at different sectors, they kind of form this K-shape. Some sectors are already back, and some sectors are going to get back sooner than others. Some sectors on the right-hand side, aviation, automotive, low-tech city services, may never get back to where they were, certainly on the employment side. Whereas life sciences, public sector, IT sector, finance, insurance, all look like they're going to bounce back soon in next year. Everywhere else is somewhere in the middle. So depending upon which sector you're in or which sectors you're working with, you're going to see some different opportunities to work with. And then if we think of how that translates into the national economic picture, we've seen this sort of V-shaped recovery, big dip in Q2, a big recovery starting in June and into July. And whilst a lot of markets are going to see that recovery continue, and we're seeing this swoosh shape, the length of the recovery by country is also significantly different. So markets at the top, Norway, for instance, the economy will recover this year. There's quite a few markets that will recover by the beginning of 2021. But down towards the bottom, Italy and Spain, Southern Europe, the recovery won't happen until the end of the year. And for the private consumption, given the impact on employment or rising unemployment, reduced household disposable income, consumption levels are going to be pushed even further back. So we're starting to really see that this difference in the recovery by sector and by the economy, well, national economies rather. And the guilty party, as it were, is trying to manage this COVID curve. So most countries have gone through their first wave on the left, and we've been actively tracking the number of active cases by country since this began in March, April. The good news is, despite news around lots of localized lockdowns happening in the UK and the Netherlands very recently, in parts of France and parts of Spain, if we look at active cases now relative to where they were in the first wave, for most markets, they've still got it much lower, less than 50% of where we were at in March and April. Czech, Poland, Hungary, quite anomalies, as it were, because the number of cases that they had initially were tiny. So the number of cases now relative to that are much bigger. But it seems like most countries, national governments are on top of it, and we will get through this hopefully in the next couple of months. But it might generate in some countries a bit of a mini dip or a little W in the recovery end of this year going into 2021. So that's the macro. Okay, key office trends. We've been running these surveys on the workplace globally and in EMEA in terms of what the changes are that we're seeing. And there are three clear trends. Working from home is here to stay, but how many days different companies will do it depends on the company, and it's not clear yet. There is a rebalancing of where we work, and obviously flex and third space comes into that. And then there's a reconfiguration of space around those trends. And what we're starting to see is that the core office still remains, but not the way it used to look. It's being reconfigured, and in some cases, maybe not as much space is being used in core, and that's being used up in third space, in flexible workspace, and of course, working from home. There is a lack of clarity, but there are different stories coming out of different companies in terms of what they're doing or what they intend to do. So we've looked at around 75, maybe 80 now, blue chip companies since August, what they've been saying they're going to do. So for most, working from home is still there. 25% of those that have responded, there's a permanent shift to working from home. But for companies like Schroders, for example, that have said they're going to do it, they're still retaining their office space or going to change the way they use office space. And one of the key things that we've highlighted here is there's a high percentage of companies that are reviewing their flex options or how they're going to use flex and third space in the years to come. And different companies have got different strategies. Yeah. Next slide. Now, in terms of just picking up on some of the key trends that we've looked at in the report, and I just want to pick up on a few key trends, not the whole thing, because we'd like you to read the report afterwards, and Tom's going to debate it with the panelists. But one interesting thing for me is over the first half of this year, the locational demand for flex has started to change. So as city patterns, as commuting patterns have been impacted, whilst up until the beginning of this year, 50% of demand was in city centre locations, that has now dropped to 32%. In the inner city, there's been a real rise from 38 to 51%. And even in outer city locations, there's a greater level of demand for flexible office space, which suggests that in certain markets, this decentralization trend is already starting to happen. Now, if you think about different cities and how they function, where is that more likely to happen than other locations, or where that may create more opportunities in certain locations over others. So the x-axis here looks at the number of people who work in the city who also live in the city. The vertical axis represents the use of public transport to get into the city. So if you're up in the top right here, you've got some of the Baltic markets, Barcelona, Dublin, less of a reliance on public transport, and more people who work in the city live in the city. So maybe not such a decentralization trend. And then you move down to the left, and you may see in the markets like Paris, London, Paris, as a city has been decentralizing for the past 5 or 6 years anyway, there may be more of an opportunity to see greater levels of decentralization. But every city functions differently in terms of how it works, and there will be different opportunities around each city. So key headline trends on Flex itself. I mean, as Tom said, take-up levels have dropped. I mean, take-up levels for office space have generally dropped by around about 30% up until the middle of this year. So take-up levels relative to that have also dropped. But if we were at about 8% of take-up at the end of 2019, it's only dropped to about 6%. So not a massive drop-off in activity. But I think one of the interesting things as well is, again, this kind of reaction that the flexible market office space can do and provide is that whilst leading up to the end of 2019, a lot of space was for co-workers or was mixed. A lot more of that space has now been shifted for private use. So it's COVID protected, and the market is already moving towards offering space that functions within these dynamics that we have. And then, of course, the last part, the operators, how is this changing? Ronan, I'm sure you'll talk us through what's happening with WeWork. There's been a bit of a retraction from WeWork across certain sites. So the dominant two, IWG being the other one, and of course, the news in the past week. Again, I'll let the panelists discuss that one, what that might mean for the market. It's changing the dominance of those two players in the sector, which is probably healthy for it. So whilst they've dominated up to date, there are many more players in the top 10 or top 50. They operate differently, whether they cover one country or one city, but with multiple facilities, or they're international and have multi-facilities. There's real room here for change for those that have got an edge in the way that they operate, in the product that they operate, to change this kind of more dominant dynamic of IWG and WeWork. I think what's interesting is just to throw a couple of stats in there. If IWG has got about 1.6 million square meters of flexible workspace, Regus, we estimate, has got about 1 million. So that accounts for about 15% of the entire market. So what happens with Regus is definitely going to have an impact. And then if we kind of bring that back out to the broader impact of what we're seeing within offices per se, there's been a lot of talk around sublet space coming back to the market. And I appreciate this chart is a little bit complex. I'll try and explain it quite quickly and simply. So what we've looked at is break options, or when different companies can break leases relative to historic levels of take-up across markets. So where there's been any big peaks in take-up that coincide with when companies could break leases, on the right-hand side, you've got greater levels of lease break release activity going on compared to down the bottom left, where you're less likely to see a lot more activity happening from leases being broken or occupiers changing what they want to do. I mean, I think over the last few months, talking to our main leasing guys, most companies are extending for a year. Some are already changing. Some are extending for a year and a half until they figure out what their business is really going to need. But it means that next year in 2022, there's going to be an awful lot of space and change coming to market. And finally, put that into the broader context of how markets are changing. Now, we've had landlord-dominant markets leading up to 2020, but in the last few months, we've seen landlord conditions really diminish, and we expect to see that to continue, so that by the end of mid-2021, there's going to be a really strong neutral position in the market, more tenant-friendly markets, but it's going to be about partnership models from the neutral perspective in terms of how you get the market to work. The quick summary points. The macro situation is improving. There are some risks on the downside, but hopefully, and I do believe they will be short-lived. If we get a vaccine in the second half of next year, then that'll be absolutely brilliant for everybody. The way we use office space is changing. There's clearly no one-size-fits-all for any occupier or any business sector. Flexible workspace is clearly evolving as a great alternative third place solution to satisfy occupier requirements. there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of change coming in the next 24 months. So it's up to you guys to make the most of it. With that, I'll hand you back to Tom.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Damien. That was, as always, very, very detailed and very insightful. So our report is going to be published later on this afternoon and should be with you all imminently. So as Damien said, one of our recent workplace surveys found that most employees wish to spend, between 1 and 2 days outside of the office, working from home. But most occupiers agree that collaboration still works best in person. So now that work is an activity rather than just a place, the office is under significant pressure to change. There, of course, isn't a golden bullet, and it's a moving feast at the moment. No one has the answer. But Ronan, working from home is definitely here to stay in some capacity. I think we can all agree on that. What do you think will be the biggest change the pandemic will have on flexible workspace?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to participate. Perhaps one step back, I agree with you. I don't think this is a binary home or office. But I think as we enter the new norm, this world of work is evolving very rapidly to become very human-centric. And, organizations are learning that they're having to trust their people to work, because today we are all working virtually. And with that, over time, they're going to have to offer people much more choice. Choice to work from a very rich ecosystem of places and destinations. Some of this will be home, some of this will be working from the corporate office, and some of this will be working from third places near home. And I think that, as you said earlier in the report, there will be some correction in the market. And I think what that would lead to over time is that traditional landlords will get smarter, right? They will offer much more flexible offering to the market. They will offer co-working spaces. They will offer more amenities. And people like IWG, people like the office group we will be competing with a much, much wider supply side of the market. And traditional corporate offices will be repurposed because those are going to be retained to some degree. And as you said, they will become all about collaboration. So I think the competition is going to increase, but we're probably going to go through, as you said earlier, perhaps 12, 24 months of correction that will be rather painful for everybody concerned. Okay,
no, really insightful. It's really hard to know how it's going to play out, but your guess is as good as mine at the moment, I think. Okay, well, look, I think it's always good to look back, to be able to look forward, and I think Ariga, Lindsay, with their 20 years experience in the sector, almost got unrivaled exposure and understanding about how to navigate a recession or down period. Do you think this experience has set you up well to deal with, the recent last 6 months, and what have you taken from that past to be able to really manage the current situation well?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And again, thank you for having Ariga as part of the panel today. Just a moment for anyone who doesn't know Ariga, we offer private workspace for the professional community in the SME and corporate market across the UK. That's not just a shameless plug. I'm going to come back to why I say that. We're part of the conversation today because actually over the last 20 years, you'll read in the report about management agreements, and we've successfully navigated what is a complex and tricky world, and really great that we have successfully navigated it. The first recession for us was September the 11th, and we had a lease. So I can tell you, by the time we hit the next recession, we were exclusively management agreements. Part of our strategy, which has been long running, has been to focus on those solid, strong customer bases. And again, not just in the UK, because what we're seeing, not just in London, because what we're seeing in 2008 was a massive decline in London quickly, and it crashes first. So across the UK. Our strategy from understanding recessions is we need to think in years, not months. And of course, like all of us, we were caught off guard a little, and we had to step up and change our world very radically. It was about safety first, it was about keeping operating, setting everybody up from home, including our own people, supporting our customers, but through our experience, knowing it wasn't about aggressively hounding them for cash. We needed to get through the panic and fear, and then we would get to talking about what the future looked like. We've kept our business going, we've kept our leads, our pipelines, and everything going with some really clear and simple communication, and we just needed to react for the future. And I think that's the key difference. When you've lived through 2 recessions, you need to think about what's coming in the 6 months afterwards. Of course, we aren't recession proof. We have a unique model, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But that model is understood by our landlords. By us sharing the benefit of the good times, we have an advantage in the down times. When the market turns, we've already got the upside in the bank that you would compare against maybe a traditional 10-year lease. But also the advantage of our model means that we can absolutely focus on bringing the best working environment for our customers rather than cost cutting. Working with landlords about how we think about the future and supporting our customers rather than spending time with them renegotiating a lease. So ultimately, what we've learned through the 20 years of experience is you have to respond to be match fit when you get to the other side. And that means that for our landlord partnerships, we will thrive again and we'll continue with successful customer base going forward.
Well, you definitely got the team to be able to deal with it. So no, thank you for that, Lindsay. Okay, we're going to move over to James now, who, as I said earlier, is part of the co-founding team of Story at British Land. And you've been going now, what, 4 or 5 years, James? This is probably, you know, your first down market. I mean, how's the business fared over the last 6 months, and are you seeing any significant opportunities as you as we hopefully exit this?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, well, actually interesting. I was going to pick up on the point. We've been going for sort of 3.5 years now, and actually in that, when we set up Story, I guess we had the opportunity to to learn from what we knew of the sector and what we observed at the time, and actually I think through the last 6 months, those learnings and the kind of our approach to the Story offering have helped us fare relatively well. And I think this comes down to sort of three areas. The first one actually more at a kind of a corporate level, like owning the buildings, not having the lease liabilities. That actually gives us a bit more flexibility as a kind of an operation on a day-to-day. Kind of being part of a FTSE 100 British Land also helps from having a robust financial standing. So there's kind of some kind of basics there which are very helpful. But actually looking more at kind of Story as an offering, we focus specifically on the larger part of the flex sector. So that's kind of scale-ups and kind of larger corporates. And actually today, our average customer size is about 50 people. We have kind of a whole range in there, but they are generally very well-funded businesses. They're often using Story as their UK or European headquarters. So actually, as a customer group, they're a pretty resilient group overall. So that's kind of, I think, helped us through the last 6 months in terms of the health of our customers. And then lastly, on the kind of the more product level, which really responds to the customer group, because they're larger businesses or teams, our average lease length is 2 years. That gives us a bit of resilience through a downturn like this. We're also less shared, which again, this is more by chance, but in a pandemic when sharing is of a particular concern. Our spaces, we have some shared space, but actually there's a real focus on the private space, private meeting rooms and private kitchens, and that's kind of helped us through. And then probably lastly, this whole concept of Story is about creating the feeling of having your own space. So customization is key too. Again, that was more for the brand and the way a company uses the space productively, but actually in the lockdown, in a global pandemic, being able to customize your space to use it safely has also been helpful. Looking a bit forward, opportunities. Shorter term, we see opportunities of just people wanting space for social distances, delayed kind of developments. There are kind of some obvious things in there, and I think the flex sector is there to help with that. Longer term, I think it's relatively early days still. I think we take comfort from the fact that COVID is accelerating existing trends, right? And I think those trends play into a lot of the trends that the flex sector responds to. So, flexibility of lease length, outsourcing your real estate, maybe flight to quality is something I hear a bit more, offices and experience. There's lots of things which I think flex sector plays to, and actually take comfort in the fact that companies are now looking at flex as an integral part of a workplace solution rather than maybe solving a problem. So that's also a nice thing. So, what is our approach is let's just continuing to grow the proposition sustainably, and off the back of that, we, in the middle of lockdown, made the decision to put Story into one of our new buildings, 100 Liverpool Street, down at Broadgate, 40,000 square feet, which will launch next year. So, we're confident in those trends.
That's really interesting. I think sometimes this sector gets people think about it just as co-working and everything's shared, and actually that's only a small part of the market. And in the report we do actually make a distinction between those different products. And actually true co-working is part of the story. It's definitely not all of it, and it's probably the smallest part of the product mix. So no, it's really insightful. Thanks for that. So look, we've heard from 3 operators who obviously got tremendous experience, but I think Daph at ServiceNow, you have used pretty much every flex solution out there one way or another. What's been your view, and have you what are your thoughts on how operators have responded to this pandemic? And have you actually maybe even taken some of the ideas back into your own self-delivered portfolio?
Yeah, sure thing. And thank you for having me as well today, to the team for Colliers. So I think overall the providers as such kind of have responded in a great way. I wouldn't say for all that they responded very proactively. So we had to chase a couple of providers to say, what are you guys planning to do? So are employees safe? So what's the position there? I think as a company, we are in a pretty unique position as we are kind of a workflow company. So we have launched kind of various apps around this topic and to kind of help us support our customers kind of through the pandemic. And then as we now kind of slowly start to reopen our EMEA offices, both fixed and flex, we built a very robust program around return to workplace. So as you can understand, we have definitely Nick borrowed a couple of pieces from the service office providers, integrated that into our plans. But also, I think our peers have publicly released a lot of information, which we could use to our advantage, which we have done. And then it's also kind of great to see our industry kind of coming together on this topic. I didn't expect it to start with, because everyone was paralyzed from the start. It's like, oh shit, what are we doing? But then everybody came together. You get more calls from other people to really bounce off ideas, talk with our brokers on both sides, the flex and the flexible market. And you always have those providers out there that are trying to get another sales pitch going over this pandemic, but I try and tend to ignore those, right? So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's in effect outsourced workspace. So that element of hospitality, service is core to the offer, and it's interesting that communication was lacking at times. You sort of think that would be something that's sort of intrinsic as part of this offer. So that's really interesting feedback. I want to just remind everyone, we're halfway through. We've had a lot of questions in so far from what I can see pinging up on my screen. So please keep them coming. We've got a very open and honest panelists, so I'm sure we'll get some great answers. So please keep them coming in. We're going to move on to our sort of second phase of plan questions, at least for the panel. I think in our report we go into some detail around different strategies that occupiers can maybe consider and use as possible solutions to some of the challenges they face. And we're actually working on a number of projects around the world at the moment where occupiers are looking to incorporate flexibility into an HQ move. So there's this phrase, flex and core, where an occupier will take less long-term space but deliver part of that site maybe within the same building or within the same campus with a flexible provider. And I think that's really something we've all been talking about for some time, but I think the last 6 months has really accelerated that theme. I think, James, you're part of British Land, obviously, millions of square feet, within the portfolio, but also Story is a big player in the flex world now. So how do you, are you seeing any creative structures emerge as the world starts to reopen?
Yeah, actually, firstly, I really like flex and core, because in British Land we talk about core and flex. So there's a slight, I see your shift in emphasis, which I can relate to. Look, the kind of the whole core, and I'm going to call it core flex actually, that's kind of in my mind, that's what it is. But that was, I think, one of the strategic drivers behind British Land launching Story. We were particularly well placed to deliver this, given at a British Land level, we have a lot of our real estate in campuses. So just for a little bit of context, 7 million square feet across central London as British Land, typically mostly in 3 major campuses of between 1 and 4 million square feet. So what that does, it gives us the opportunity to offer occupiers, companies, customers the ability to grow and flex and take different services and different products in a single location, which we found to be really attractive. And I think when we start looking at the kind of the core and flex, it's probably worth thinking about it in 2 ways. One is existing customers and one is new customers. So from an existing customer point of view, and when I say existing, it's kind of a British Land customer typically, and they sit they're in their conventional space, outgrow it. We have the opportunity to plug them into a kind of a completely managed space, a Story space, with a single relationship in one location, in a single location, and actually have a variety of different offerings and products to go with it. We actually have a really nice example of that. We have a fintech company, I won't say the name, but started on a conventional lease for 15,000 square feet, grew very quickly. Actually, in the same building, we had Story space, so we can quite quickly plug them into half a floor. We can make that feel seamless, so that the extension of their office then feels like it's the same office, the same IT infrastructure, because we can start to actually work with the building a lot more. They then, a year later, continued to grow. A whole floor became available in the building, and we did a whole bespoke fit out for a managed deal. Actually turned it around from one lease ending on the Friday to them going in on the Monday. So it was very, very, very quick and quite painful at the time, but we did it. And then now they're in a position where they're sitting across multiple products in the same building, but all again managed through one relationship, and all the kind of the back end works together. So we see that as being a really kind of a key advantage from a Story British Land point of view. In terms of new customers, we see more and more the presence of Story being in a building, 100 Liverpool Street included, being a key driver behind the decision making of a conventional lease company. Actually, we might see that kind of in various ways. One, they just like it to be there. Take it a next step, they might want options or first right of refusal on the space, and actually we can, we're in a position where we can give preferential treatment to that kind of situation. And we actually explored some reverse flex. I know it's in your report, but somebody actually wants to take, say, 3 floors of a building. Maybe we can help. If they don't need all that space, we have the capabilities in the building, in the campus. We can actually start to play around with reverse flex. And then finally, in terms of meeting and events, we have as a bolt-on really to the Story offering, we have kind of a Story Club, which is the same kind of, it's just meeting and event spaces and some lounge space, but it's open to the campus occupiers, so the British Land customers. And again, more and more companies are coming into one building. You've got the Story presence on the ground floor. It's all fully integrated. It's not branded. It just feels like it's there. It's almost an extension of your office. And we are seeing customers fitting out their floors differently because they know that capability is there, because there's a 200-person event space there that they confidently can have and trust British Land to deliver that for them. So we can offer a package related to a conventional lease. So the more we kind of link the two things together. It's actually one of the areas, you know, going forwards, I see kind of more and more exciting things to play with that kind of conventional capability and the buildings and the campuses and that kind of, you know, the workspace capability and flexing and blending them together.
Yeah, it's not just a London thing either. We're seeing the same thing in Hong Kong. There's a project we're working on in Sydney where it's exactly as you described. It's more than just a piece of flex in a multi-let building or campus. It's all of those other services and amenities that can be part of that product offering. And I think that's really exciting, the way that the sector is moving more to sort of more towards hospitality. And it's a very broad term, obviously, but it's more than just flex space. And that whole, you know, it is now part of any grade A building now. And often actually a lot of our corporate clients as part of RFPs for new sites pre-COVID would be only looking at buildings which had some sort of flex within the building for that exact reason. So let's see if that continues. I expect it probably will. Okay, well, another strategy that we've outlined in the report, and it's just another example of how flex can be part of the solution, not the whole solution, obviously, but part of it. And this whole sort of dispersed portfolio or hub and spoke model, you know, we read about where perhaps, you know, there's a smaller London HQ now, and then smaller offices across the region or outside of the or around the country. I think that's quite an interesting byproduct. And I think a lot of the research that Damien's put together with the team is showing that suburban and outer central city is growing in terms of supply. I think, Lindsay, I'm intrigued to know about, you know, with your portfolio all over the country, are you seeing any signs of that taking, you know, accelerating as a strategy?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the hub and spoke, probably going to what James just said, it's always existed. You know, corporates have used that to overflow for projects, you know, overflow when their campuses themselves have got too busy. But it's not always been in the same location or in the same city as where that headquarter is based. And look, that's a major component of all of our flex businesses today. I guess in recent years, we've also seen businesses set up in regional markets to really tap into talent that maybe they haven't found in there where the headquarters are based, and also to help develop markets. So really that is the spoke, and that's always been there. I think now it might be used for a different purpose. I mean, whilst it's far too early to call, we have seen from an EMEA point of view, and I think that's echoed out across the market, that the regional lead flow has picked up and in some cases exceeded what we had pre-COVID. And London is coming, but it remains behind where everyone would choose for it to be. The other trend that we're seeing, and it's all around this on-demand, and how do you have a part-time solution? So like all operators, we're going to rise to the challenge of really creating agile working. But of course, I'm not sure anyone really knows what agile working means to them. Therefore, as the operators, we've got to have, under the banner of, say, Flex 2.0, a range of options. So private space on demand, part-time, daily, weekly, monthly, multiple locations. And I guess I would see that the smaller companies will tap into this really quickly. Those companies that have decided to work from home because either they need to recover, or actually that's just what they'll do going forward. It'll be part of their agile working. But I think for the larger occupiers, there's this lots of questions. What is agile? What do the people want? Will what the people want change over the next 6 months as we get, you know, further past major lockdowns? How much will it cost? How do we set up people from home? As responsible employers, we should probably contribute to their cost of their broadband. Have they got the right desk set up? There's a minefield of questions for occupiers to consider. And for operators, how do we make it commercially work? How do we give a part-time solution? Do landlords start to give us part-time costs? I know the answer to that. So there's lots of commercial challenges that we have to work through. And will people be happy sharing private space? So on a Monday to Wednesday, it's for Colliers, and a Thursday to Friday, it's for somebody else. Is that okay in the new world that we go into? So And actually all of this, what about well-being? So I think there are so many questions, not enough answers yet, because not enough time has passed to stabilize. We're not in consistency rather at this point. The one thing I think that we do know is we are simple social creatures. We like familiarity of where we work. We want to feel comfortable when we go into our office, whether that's in a first, second or third space. And we need to have clear lines between home and work. So many questions, but the one thing that probably excites me and the Ariga team is the flex business, the flex market has most of the solutions right now. And we will be the solution for many, many companies going forward, which will meet the needs of employees, which will be fantastic. It'll be great for the sector. But actually, let's hope we'll save some occupiers some money as well. So I think it's lots of models and quite an exciting time.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's interesting that, that sort of third space, not knowing whether people can work from home all the time, whether they actually want to work from home. It's really dynamic. I think, Ronan, with your vast experience, so I'm not trying to say you're old or anything, but you've seen a lot of change over the last over your career. And I mean, do you think there's going to be a huge shift towards these highly mobile, work anywhere, whenever you want type solutions, or what's your prediction?
So I think one thing I like to remind us all is that what we're experiencing now is not new. If you worked for any of the large technology companies in the last 20 years, in most cases, people were given the choice of which office to use, how often to turn up to, and were given the technology to actually perform their work, and a degree of trust that your performance was measured on collaboration and output and impact, as opposed to presentism. So what has happened now is that the entire world population working in offices has been confined to the same experiment. This is lasting a long time. By the time we get through this, could be 18 months. And as Lindsay said, we're creatures of habit. And I think people, to some degree, if we look at the data of all the surveys that have been conducted by yourselves, by Cushman, by Lisman, and by corporates themselves, people like the fact that they can control their time and how they use their time. And the biggest issue that continuously comes up in every survey that I've seen in the last 3-4 months has been the commute. And if you spend 10 hours a week commuting, and at the moment you are not, and you save that time, then you're doing something else. So I think we will get through this. We will not be in a binary home or the office. And what I'm hearing from a lot of corporates is that they are formulating what is the right solution, what's the right balance for their organization, for the type of business they're in, for their culture, and how are they looking to kind of enter the new norm with a different sets of offerings to employees. So as the panel said here, very few companies have actually figured it out. Heavily involved with a lot of these heads of real estates, and everyone is actually pulling board members to the conversation. Presented it to one executive committee of a large bank from South Africa yesterday, and they are all admitting that they're in the midst of that dialogue. But they're also seizing the opportunity to think through the way they do business. And one thing that has come consistently is the world is now opened up for their talent pool. They don't feel they have the same restriction of where to hire people as before. So it's quite interesting. I think this is much bigger reset than just bricks and mortar. I think it is about human centricity, and it's about businesses seizing the opportunity to do things radically different. And yes, they will cut costs, and yes, they will trim the workforce. But I do think that it's much more fundamental change that we're going through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Interesting times, undoubtedly. I think, Daph, ServiceNow, you are pretty progressive with how you approach the workplace. I know you're a keen advocate of everything sort of flex. As I said earlier, you've used a lot of different products and solutions. Has this pandemic changed your view of your strategy, or has it maybe even just endorsed your pre-existing strategy?
Yeah, I think for now it kind of has impacted to a certain extent because, as you already stated, we are already a heavy Flex user, and I still believe, and I will strive to the very end to kind of build more flexible workspace for our company. For us, it starts with the market entry. We start with Flex, and if there's really no other option, then we would go fixed. Unless government regulation would say otherwise. So I think by now we are close to 60% of our portfolio in terms of locations is fully flex. Still relatively small spaces, but we try to build more and more flexibility, and we want to get bigger in flex as well. So in terms of kind of country level. In our German business, which is a fast-growing business, we wanted to create more flexibility for them to continue to grow and to move wherever they wanted to move in terms of where the business would take them. So we opened up more locations previous year, get closer to our customers, and so we increased the level of employee experience kind of from entertaining 30% of the people to now, exceeding 70%, I'm pretty sure of. Now, with regards kind of flex to the, if you look at the post-COVID world, I think many of it has already been said, but, when you look at the distributed workforce model, which we're all trying to now figure out, and the war for talent, so what are we going to do? So is it only the flexible providers? Is it more than only flexible providers? I'm myself kind of looking into different hub and spoke models. We talked about hybrid hospitality as I think one of the solutions that might actually work best in those suburban areas. So to kind of create all of that and above. And then we're talking to many market players right now, and have been for the past few months. So. And we haven't found a partner that actually can say, well, we're going to make it happen for you on a global scale, right? So, and this is coming kind of from all of the traditional players. So it seems that they are not as ready, because they're stuck with huge portfolios. So that's kind of where the flexibility ends for most of those providers, right? So if we ask them to grow with us, and explore territory, that's kind of where it stops for most of the conversation, which is unfortunate, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean it's a big old world out there, isn't there? And it's very hard for operators to be everywhere and have that depth of experience and and also inspire the confidence to you to be able to outsource everything to them in every single market across the world. I think that is a big ask. I'm very conscious that we've rattled through 50 minutes already almost. So we have got another section to tackle, which is around how operators and landlords can deliver space. We've also had some really interesting questions pop up. So I think I'd like to, if we could try and keep the answers fairly brief, so we've got time just to get into the Q&A, guys, that'd be great. I'm intrigued to know, James, from a landlord's point of view, there's a lot of talk about other landlords developing their own products, maybe doing more flexible things. What's been, from British Land's perspective, what was the biggest challenge for you guys developing your own product?
So I guess on paper, when you look at the capabilities of an operational landlord, everything is there. There's kind of design, fit out, property management, leasing, marketing, finance, the whole range. But I think the challenge that comes with trying to use those capabilities to work in the flex sector is that it's targeting a very different type of customer, a very different customer need, and I think it needs this kind of hyper focus on being able to tune those capabilities to deliver for that in this different sector. For example, the design and fit out of a flex space, from the kind of the business model to the kind of planning to the actual delivery, is very, very different to the design and delivery of a £300 million building. And that's kind of the sort of the supply chain, the people there, like the whole thing is different. And that's fundamentally, I think, the kind of the challenge, which sort of cuts a bit to the operating model, to the you know, the culture, to the skill set within kind of a company, a landlord. You know, from a British Land point of view, we started Story really as a bit of a kind of skunk works. You know, we assembled a small group of people across the business into a slightly loose structure and just had one small project to deliver, one small building, and we did it, we tested it, and then we grew from there. I think that the challenge that we then have as you kind of scale it is being able to balance this autonomy to experiment and kind of, you know, grow and do things a bit differently, but to also leverage the economies of scale and the efficiencies of really delivering this whole thing joined up. And it's this kind of constant balancing act that I think is, you know, is a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We've got 8 minutes, so I'm going off script, team, and I'm going to actually ask some off-piece questions from our audience. I think, Lindsay, I'd like you to tackle this one, which I think sort of leads into what you sort of do. But the question is, if things are moving towards hospitality, why would a landlord not use a hospitality operator rather than a flex operator?
So look, I have the unique advantage of previously working for the world's largest hospitality provider. It's different. So what we've done in Auriga is we've brought in the hospitality skill. So we've got the customer experience side, so we can consciously walk through the customer journey, making sure that everything and the first impressions are right. But actually there's more to it. So when I ran restaurants, was I capable of taking walls up and down with great pace? Was I capable of the fast-paced transactions that were needed in the short sales cycle? So I think that the answer is there's a hybrid of both, and you'll see that many operators, including Auriga, are bringing in the talent from the hospitality sector to support Flex and to really, I guess, meet the ever-growing customer expectation, because it's more than just great coffee and Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, we are seeing some hospitality companies, you know, get involved in the work, you know, Flex Workspace, you know, Zennismore, Soho House, the core hotels, and so on. So I think, yeah, the world's emerging, definitely. I think, Ronan, I'd like to answer this one if that's okay. I'm not sure who it's from, but could you please comment on the recent news of IWG's threat to break up lease agreements if landlords do not give discounts on rates or rents, I assume that might say. What is your reaction to this? Sorry, you asked for a tricky question. There you go.
I do speak to Mark Dixon every so often. We have this 25 years relationship. Look, everyone in the market, whether you're in retail or in commercial offices, you know, began a fairly honest dialogue with the landlords about terms, right? There's no secret about it. If you attend any of the ULI conferences or the GRI, you would have witnessed that there is tension there between retailers, occupiers of offices, and landlords. I think the question is how you go about it and why you trigger the conversation. So I can't really comment on, you know, what we've seen in the press recently. I'm sure that Mark is astute enough to do it because it makes sense for the business and there are opportunities to seize. You know, he has seen 3 recessions, right? Probably four very significant cycles. So I do think and do trust that he knows what he's doing. But similar to that, we've also been at WeWork, we've been very declarative about it, that we have engaged our landlords across the world in a meaningful dialogue about, you know, can we improve terms? Can we ensure that our business is successful and profitable in the locations where we have commitments? So I think this is just the nature of the crisis that hit everyone. I think the question is how you go about doing it, and whether you seek to draw blood or whether you have a professional exchange with your landlord and try and come towards each other.
I mean, there's a lot of talk of, you know, the lease arbitrage model within this sector, you know, maybe being obsolete. You know, I think Lindsay would probably agree with that statement. James probably would as well. I mean, James, one of the other questions we've had is there's a lot of speculation regarding the underlying financial health of some flex operators. Do you think what level of fallout might we expect to see if COVID extends into late 2021? Any views on that?
I guess my observation of the flex sector is, and I think it comes to the report that you've just published, is that it's kind of top 50 flex providers accounts for something like 60-something% of all the space in EMEA, and then there's this really long tail, so probably 1,300 operators, so a lot in this kind of long tail, and I think when you start to then look at some of the kind of the kind of the pain that every company is going through right now, and just given the fact that at times in the flex sector there has been a boom, and it's kind of been everybody, there's sort of a gold rush, and I think now there's a bit of a moment of kind of realization, and I think it will be a real test, particularly in that long tail. I think in the kind of some of the larger players, you have a bit more scale, perhaps a bit more economies of scale that comes with that, perhaps a bit more kind of financial backing, and you attract the kind of investment that's required. On that long tail, I think it's a real test of of the focus and a kind of a really clear strategy of what you're trying to achieve. I'm not saying in any way that because someone's small, they're doomed to fail, because actually you can have a really clear focus and run a very good business. But I think there might be some companies that are kind of caught in this slight middle where they don't, haven't quite responded quick enough, don't have a clear positioning, and that's where there will be casualties. How many of those, I have no idea. I think probably it's interesting. I think you can draw parallels to the retail world. There are, if you look at the retail world today, the companies that have a really clear strategy, they're probably more omni-channel, have sort of a better digital presence, more experiential in their kind of shopping experience. They're the ones that are winning now, and the ones that are suffering are probably haven't responded to the trends quickly.
Okay, they're interesting. We're almost on the hour, but I'd like to ask Daph one final question, which is popped up on my screen, and it's someone's asked around. You've got offices, locations across the world, and work culture varies tremendously across different countries, even within cities sometimes. And from your point of view, do you make a conscious decision about to use flex in certain markets and not in others? How does your strategy differ country to country, region to region?
I don't think it's different across the board. It's kind of what we're trying to do is give everyone the same experience or a similar experience. So when you look at from a fixed, if you would move, and I've done this a couple of times now, where we moved from fixed offices to kind of a more managed office model, we're achieving the same look and feel, same brand. So that's what we're trying to push in. So we're standardizing our brand effort and our colors and a couple of other elements. And therewith, we can create an experience kind of across the board, no matter what kind of solutions you're in. Of course, when you start off and you're, with a 3-person office somewhere, that will definitely be different. But yeah, it's a good thing. Also, when we talk about that distributed workforce, how are you going to enhance the employee experience from a person that works remotely? Right? Is there anything else that we can do? We have been very generous as a company to our employees about this topic, to providing the right desk, providing chair, and all that kind of stuff. But is there an additional element that we can give to them, or more elements even? So that will definitely be a challenge kind of going forward.
Okay, I'm being told to wrap. So thank you all. That whizzed by really quickly. I hope it was interesting and engaging for everyone, and hopefully you've taken something away. So thank you for your time, all the panelists, and thanks for everyone who's joined in. Hopefully, we can't see if anyone's joined. I'm assuming people have. So hopefully you had a good hour. And the Flex report will be delivered imminently to your inboxes. So thank you so much, and have a nice afternoon.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. See you.